Hi class, welcome back. Hopefully you're doing well out there. And this is part two. If you haven't watched part one about the triptych, and then we'll talk about diptychs in this as well, then watch part one first. So we stopped off looking at this one by Gary Schneider called Feature One Panel of Triptych. I just wanted to say in this how it's broken up a little differently, and there's a lot of creativity in how you can do this. And you have a sense of these creatures looking at what's happening in the sky, and then it moves to more of them sort of as part of it, and then a bigger grouping. And it feels like the landscape's the same. So there's a kind of feeling of a story that happens in these because you have more panels. Another one that's showing more panels this is actually for not a Life of Christ triptych detail showing the left wing. Okay, so there's a detail on one of the spots, but this is actually four panels. It's showing from the upper left the Holy Night, so that's Christ being born, 12-year-old Christ here, and then Christ and Judas, and the three Magi. So three Magi, and then Christ and Judas here. So by Emil Nolde, um, oil on canvas, scenes from the life of Christ and his style, important moments from the book of Matthew, birth, when he was found in the temple, when the Magi were coming, and then when he was betrayed. So interesting to think about the points in a person's story as the idea of it. This is from art history, picking points in a person's story. Another way you could lay it out, Francis Bacon studies for self-portrait. He's famous for kind of making grotesque images of people. So he's studying the ways he could do it, but he has one on top of the other. It's kind of like a film strip when you get stripped from you sit in a booth and get your photos taken together. Has a feeling of that, which kind of creates a different effect, huh? And then I like to show this piece of knocking off like famous imagery of Mona Lisa, but playing with it. It's by Ed Paschke, Triptych, 1989 to 1990 paintings. So you have a feeling of person, all kinds of weird, feeling of like late 80s, early 90s bright colored art. Kind of a feeling of like messing with the image being cropped and cut and clip art and using this overly known image of the Mona Lisa to play with it. So that's interesting. Then there's a lot of famous ones of these by Monet of his water lilies from his house in Givenchy, where he did ponds with paintings with the lily pads. And this shows kind of that scene laid out in a way that each one's broken up that are pretty beautiful using a lot of texture. So you can do a place. I wanted to show you, bring you back to another altar piece because I wanted to point out the different shapes that you could do. A lot of these throughout the world, really famous Renaissance ones, Madonna and Child with saints and prophets on the other side, and then the crucifixion. These were really, really common back in the, this is from the 1300s, but for a long time, every church would have had these type of things, and each panel kind of has different scenes happening. There's one here and here. It's overall panel of different scenes. So you could do something like this with a lot of patterning and even kind of drawing some of the feeling of framing. We saw that on some other pieces, how they draw the framing inside. This is an interesting thing because it's actually photography on light boxes, but I still wanted to show you how the feeling of how you laid it in the room, laid it out, or intended the space to be, and the size of them in relationship to each other would change the feeling a lot of the pieces. And this is something that's used in sculpture. It's not just two-dimensional art. This is made out of by Joel Gomez, sculpture installation from 2001, wire, paper pulp, glass, and sea sponge. So he's creating like creature-like forms, or maybe like how you have a silver dollar right there. So kind of like kelp and all kinds of things going on with this. And then even people have used it a lot in video art. These are by Bill Viola, famous video artist. It's called Poem A, and he uses scenes of like video to deal with like kind of a poetic understanding of things, spirituality. And somebody did this one also on video, but they messed with the background. It's an owl moving around, so it's a feeling of a particular moment, but then changing the background gives it a totally different idea of you would hear the owl and things like that in a video. But nonetheless, I want you to kind of get the idea that there's lots of ways you can think about this. And this one is using metal pieces collaged onto it to create a sort of feeling of a bird in space and flight. Kind of flight happening here with like an arrow maybe kind of feeling, or the bird skull with the beak, and then this bird, and then there's other feelings of skulls. So there's something interesting happening here about maybe nature. It's called Bird Song by Tony Berlant. So there's a feeling maybe of all kinds of different ideas of like loss of nature maybe happening here, death and life. And this is another sculpture I wanted to show you, just to kind of keep you thinking about things. Roman Windows Triptych by Betty Woodman, 2006. So she's playing with the idea of like windows and pottery and kind of black and white, and there's a ton of other things here from cities and kind of calligraphic line. You see these are plants in black and white, and these are supposed to be the windows that she's looking out of. There's like pottery in the midst of them. Really interesting to play with this in 3D even. Okay, going on to some diptychs. These are interesting pieces. There's quite a few of these. This is called so this is a diptych, and it's showing, it's by Robert Campani from 1438, oil on wood. It's actually maybe Roger van der Weyden, they say, but the point is it's like got different people, John the Baptist and the Franciscan theologian Heinrich von Werl and Saint Barbara. So it's talking about kind of this connection of people through time. This is John the Baptist. This is the theologian, and this is a saint in sort of place in the history and connection. When you have two pieces, it automatically becomes a binary, like good and evil, light and dark, all the types of ways we create binaries. And so this interesting thing that happens when you have to think about what you put, this is a Native American, and then we have like textures and abstractions kind of becoming a binary in a way. That's interesting. But you have to think about what you put if you use two. Two is not easier. You think, oh, one less strong, but it doesn't necessarily make it better or easier. It can be harder to make something successful. This is interesting because this is printmaking. They're registration marks, but they're putting them throughout the piece, so they're implicating it like a target. We have some idea of bombs and cities burning and fires and parts of the United States and someone falling. A lot going on here. David, oh, I forget how to say his name. Wojarski, Wojarowicz, Polish name, I think. Diptych 2, 1982. It's spray paint on board, so he's using spray paint stencils and messing with it. It's very interesting. Ideas about modern world. Liechtenstein again. This diptych is just through text and image. And he's like famous for, as you know, using comic books and taking them out of context, pop culture, pop artists. So taking bits of story and disconnecting them. So this is interesting. It's smaller and then larger, and then he's framing it within the frame, right? So I want you guys to think about that. You can use words in this. I'm giving you a lot of freedom. You just have to make sure you have some representational drawing. This one's fun because reading Nancy. Nancy was a comic book. There's also an article about how to read Nancy, about reading comics. So she's famous for that. She's a comic character. Is a binary, realistic sort of feeling of Nancy the cartoon, but it's getting all pastel-y here, but that's how she looks. And then we have a totally messed up version of her, love, egg splattering or being fried, so someone throwing a fried egg at her, playing with this idea. It's by Joe Brainard from 1974. So he's playing with all these ideas of reproduction in comic books as part of that, and then abstracting it, changing it, making it have a commentary. Another piece by Judy Chicago, My Dove in the Clefts of the Rock, from the voice of the Song of Songs. So that's actually from Song of Solomon in the Bible, playing with these type of ideas. This is part of the text, and Hebrew, English, and then an image. Part of it, it's a print, two prints reproduced. So this playing with some of her similar ideas of postmodernism, postmodern feminist ideals that she has going on here. And then this one, interesting, showed you because it's like two photographs. You're doing drawings, of course, but there's an automatic story created here when you put things next to each other. We don't know the story because we have a feeling of gaze and connection. So whatever you put in these pieces is going to be strong connection between each other. This guy, actually, interesting, he created a website where you can go. His name is Arturo Herrera, the dia center .org, dia center.org, Herrera. It's actually like a way he can create your own diptychs by flipping through his imagery and adding them. And you create your own dualities, so he's playing with that idea. Another piece that I thought was pretty interesting. It says the neighbors were suspicious of her hairstyle. I'm playing with these imagery to create a story of back and forth. Same scene, but cut up. So another type of piece of Daniel Joshua Goldstein, 1978, woodcut diptych. So you can cut a scene in half. And then there's a positive and negative. So this is playing with photography's ideas of positive and negative. And she's back to back though, so it's like not looking at each other, not knowing each other, disconnection happening. From 2007, Anthony Gocolia. This piece, very interesting, is about from 2003 by Brian Shannon, Flute 1 and 2. So this is a little piece of a Doric column, and looking at it from down below, and then looking at part of it, the fluted sides that are carved. And it's just dealing with the ideas of perfectionism and perfection and the golden mean that was often being sought after in Greek art. He did that with another piece here that's a Corinthian column top, the capital, playing with the same ideas, but connected to each other automatically because of the shapes. So you have different ways you can play with this tension, different color. You could use color. On the project sheet, I believe it says you have to use at least one color, but a lot of it can be black and white. If you use only one color, it will really change the piece a lot because it'll be the main focal point. But I just want you to think about, what do you want to do? Do you want two of them? How are you going to do it? How are you going to incorporate something that's realistic, so to speak? I mean, do you create something that would be in a way almost like a red herring? That means something that's just whatever. Like, these are totally just, you get to take the form and pair them, the identical size panels, and then it creates a duality, but you're making comment on it because it's not like it's your own randomized one when you do it. It's not necessarily life and death, positive, negative, before and after. And this one would, I'm talking specifically about this guy Herrera who did this website project. But do you want to play with that idea? Maybe. I think it might be more interesting to try to play with what it actually is and think about two things like before and after, life and death, and other binaries that can actually be really interesting to deal with. Inside, outside, home and not home. You know, you can play with a lot of those type of things, and that might be better. Or you can create a red herring. But I think if you do that, then you're doing, you need to be intentional about it and the design. So I like these type of stories that can happen in things, and the way transformation can happen. And I think this is a really large theme you could go on and on about in art. I just want to say, think about how you lay it out, how you intend to lay it out, the scale of things, because that will communicate stuff, and the subject matter and color you use. This is going to be a pretty big project, but I think the results can be very interesting. Think about maybe a journey that happens. So post your questions in the group and we'll talk about it more. We can have a video meeting if you need to. All right, have a good day. Talk to you guys later.